Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for August 5th, 2013. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined by Council members Bob Blumenfield and Paul Koretz, and we are ready to begin. We're going to complete our regular agenda items before we hear our closed session items and the special closed session item on the special agenda. And members, I would propose item 4 as a candidate for approval on consent, unless any member has any questions. This is our standard Office and Finance Investment Report. If you have questions, that's fine. Otherwise, it's ready to be approved. And seeing no objection, that'll be the action of the committee. Is there anyone here wishing to offer general public comment? Because as of today, as of this moment, I have no cards. I don't see anyone raising their hand for general public comment, so we will go ahead and close general public comment, and that will bring us to item number 3.
Item number 3 is a board review report relative to delinquent accounts receivables for the Board of Public Works, Office of Accounting.
And who will be reporting on behalf of the Board of Review?
A little confused. I think there's 2 agendas. Are you on the revised agenda, item 3, or on the other agenda, item 3? The regular.
This is the Board of Review report.
Wei Lau with the Office of Finance. I'm covering for the Controller's Office, who's the chair of the Board of Review. I'm not sure what specific questions you have on this item, but what is before you is a write-off for the Department of Public Works, the Board of Public Works, I should say, Office of Accounting. There were several accounts that went to the Board of Review, and the Inspector General asked our office to focus on 24 of it, and these are accounts over $5,000 requested for write-off. In our review of the accounts, the Inspector General
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you a moment, because the Inspector General is here. I'd like him to come forward as well, please, and participate in this discussion. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Fernando Campos, Inspector General with the CAO's office. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So what we did was we went through the 24 accounts that the Inspector General asked us to focus on. They were selected because the names were recognizable or because of the dollar amounts on them. And after our review of the 24 items on the report before you from the Controller's Office, after the findings section, the Office of Finance report back to the Board of Review dated January 25th, 2013, we found 5 accounts with the potential for further collection action that might result in some additional revenues to the city. The rest of the accounts, we found that the collection potential was low, either because the responsible party was unclear, it has already been paid in full upon our review, the businesses were out of business at this point or cannot be located, or the invoices are just so old that it would be very difficult to try to collect on them.
In addition to that, Ms. Lau, one of the invoices had to be reissued to a new party, and then we also had 3 other invoices that there was potential for a payment arrangement. So in total, the Office of Finance and also the Department of Public Works with our office, the CAO's office, were able to identify those 9 accounts totaling approximately $217,000, $218,000 that could have or could lead to a revenue for the city. So with all the good work from the departments, we were able to identify those accounts and lower the amount of write-off from 52 accounts, $845,000 down to 43 accounts, approximately $627,000, which is the item before you for consideration.
All right. Very good. We've been joined by Mr. Bonin as well. I think that the city has made tremendous progress in eliminating some of the bad debt from our books, which is a good thing because it continues to be a source of great public confusion when we talk about what's collectible, when we continue to carry bad debt, which is entirely uncollectible on our books. And so I do want to compliment all of the participants at the Board of Review and the Inspector General for advancing continuing to advance this cause forward. And at the same time, we certainly don't want to write off bad debt that's collectible. So this closer look is very much welcome as well. Can you speak a little bit to Category 2, where it was where the two items that were defined as having a potential for collection that is low or was unclear as to the responsible party? What was the situation in those circumstances, if you can
Well, one of
discuss
the
it?
invoices in Category 2 is Specific Homes LLC, and as you know, sometimes with these development companies, they go away after the property is already developed. The other one, as I'm looking at it, 5512,
Number 17,
is Morgan Adams LP, another one of those individuals that, it will be difficult for us to locate in terms of the potential for collection. But in our report, we did manage to collect from MTA, Children's Hospital. We also were able to collect from All Nations Church when we got them the other adjusted invoice. So I believe engineering's still working with the Port of Long Beach on that one other item. And then the other one that we had was Laurel Canyon, which although we've made contact, the statute of limitation on that account has basically run out, so we have not been able to collect on that one at this point.
So to recap, Councilmember Krikorian, just those two accounts specifically, those were two firms that were difficult to locate. In many cases, they were out of business or have relocated. So those, we determined that the likelihood of collection would be lower, and if we pursued it, the cost to just pursue it would be a lot less than what we would return to identify those individuals. So we could find out that they were insolvent or they went bankrupt and no longer in business. So we decided, and the recommendation from staff was not to pursue those, and we identified those as less likely or low likelihood of collections.
And so those are differentiated from Category 5 because in Category 5, it was clearly
Clear.
found
Correct.
that the
Right.
firm was out of business,
Right.
whereas there's still some question about the...
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, Mr. Kretz.
On the ones that are very low likelihood, not impossible, but very low likelihood of success, do we ever try to put those out to collection companies and give it to them at pennies on the dollar to try and collect?
Well, for the
It
most
seems like until we hit the point where nobody wants them, not just us, but nobody wants to go after those,
for the
we should
most
be able to do something with them.
part, these accounts either went to finance to attempt to collect, because we have in-house staff that also does collection work, or they went out to collection agencies already.
No,
And
but
they
what
have
I'm
not
saying
been
is,
Councilman,
what if you gave them for 2 cents on the dollar and let someone buy them from you and do their own collecting?
I believe what you're referring to, Councilman Koretz, is the debt sale, the potential of selling that debt to a third-party vendor for consideration. I do have a report that's going to be released shortly that talks about debt sale and moving forward with that option for us to monetize or at least receive pennies on the dollars or even 5 or 10 cents on the dollar. So in those cases, we could conduct a debt sale. The last time the city did conduct a debt sale was in 2009, so it's been about 4 years since we've done that. There has been some opportunities missed. That report that I will be forwarding to your committee for consideration will highlight that. So in terms of debt sale, that is something that we are looking at, and it is going to be a recommendation that's going to be before you through a separate report.
So anything that we're writing off now that would be appropriate for that kind of a debt sale?
I would estimate a good 25 to 33% of the accounts that we're writing off right now would have a potential. It could be as high as 50% of all accounts that we're writing off that could have a potential for debt sale. Some of the items before you are past the statute of limitations, so that's an important thing to highlight. Once it's past the statute of limitations, a debt buyer is less likely or less attractive to buy our portfolio simply because they cannot legally pursue that. Since our accounts that we have in our portfolio range from anywhere from 2 to 5 years of statute of limitations, in this category, and at least in that bucket of category that has passed the statute of limitations, a debt buyer is less likely to even consider bidding on that portion of our portfolio. But the goal for us is not only to accelerate the write-off process, but also to make sure that all our accounts are below the statute of limitations. We have accelerated that through releasing new outside collection agency contracts that have reduced the time schedule for collections from approximately 2.5 years down to about 15 months. So we do believe within the next several months we will be in a better position to have less aged accounts so that we can sell it out to a third-party vendor for debt sale consideration. So within the next 6 months to 9 months, we will be in a better position to sell those accounts. But the items before you that have been past the statute of limitations, those accounts are less likely to be even receive pennies, 1 or 2 pennies, because debt sellers will not be attracted to that type of portfolio.
So they're able to try and collect, but the person who owes the money is no longer required
If it's
to pay
past
it.
statute of limitations, they cannot collect.
Oh, so they can't even
No,
make that
federal
up.
laws will prohibit them from collecting. That's what makes it less attractive.
Gotcha.
So the goal for us is to remove those accounts that are in a severely aged category but below a statute of limitation timeline so that we can get it out to a debt seller. So now that we have a compressed schedule or an accelerated schedule of about 15 months, from 15 months all the way to 5 years, we could consider those accounts for debt sale. So that's something that we will be looking at, that I've been working with the Office of Finance. Also with the Collections Board review, I did present last week to them some protocols or proposed changes to their protocols and procedures that would include debt selling as a alternative.
Great. Thank you.
Well, along those lines, is there any time sensitivity to when we write off these debts? I mean, some of these are significantly aged. The ones that we've written off previously have been aged, by a decade or more. Is there any reason that we shouldn't hold this then until such time as a debt sale might be considered in order to add value to that debt sale? What are the costs and benefits of writing off this debt now as opposed to saving it until such time as there might be a debt
That
sale?
the accounts before you in this report, as well as the action that was taken by the Board of Review in its January 2013 meeting, basically was part of the response from departments to the CAO memo to clean out all your old accounts. So that January meeting was one of the last type of cleanup, and we got a large volume from departments responding to it. So these are really old. Some of these accounts were over 15 years old.
And I would agree with Ms. Lau. I would not hold up the recommendation to approve the items before you simply because these are severely aged accounts that are past statute of limitations. The ones that were below the statute of limitations that we can actually collect, for example, those 9 accounts that were highlighted, the ones that we could collect, we are moving forward. For example, the MTA or the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, or even the 2 accounts from the Port of Long Beach, we are aggressively, or we have already collected those accounts. So the items before you are predominantly the statute of limitations, severely aged accounts, which we can't do anything
And when we
with.
consider debt sale, we do have to consider the state's legislative changes and regulations that just basically passed and will be effective, I believe it's January 2014, on debt sale, in terms of the information and data points that's going to have to be given on those transactions. So these things being as old as it is, it might even be difficult to come up with the data that we need for it to be an attractive portfolio for debt buyers.
What are the state law changes that go into effect in January?
I'm trying to do it off the top of my head. I can't remember all of them, that they have to do with noticing periods and proof of letters being received by the debtor.
Oh, actually, yes, I suppose Mr. Blumenfield might know that.
Data integrity and disclosure,
That's
account disclosure.
Part
ownership.
of the debt collection issues became a big issue on the state and was involved in some of this, is that there were some really bad actors out there who were collecting debt, and then when government agencies would sell their debt as well, theoretically on behalf of the government entity, they would be hounding these people, and they didn't even have the notice that it was the right person, So I was going to say that if we do sell the debt, which is a good idea, we need to make sure we have a clear set of protocols about who we're selling that debt to. Both the state went pretty far, although there were a lot of us who might have gone even further, and we may want to consider as a city how far we want to go in terms of what protocols we want to set up beyond what the state now mandated protocols are on those debt collectors.
Right.
So we should certainly have that conversation when the Inspector General's report comes back with that recommendation. The reason I was asking about the change in January is would that impact our urgency in conducting a sale? In other words, if it becomes significantly more burdensome to us, for example, in January, would that suggest then we should expedite considering that recommendation and acting on it before the new state law takes
I would
effect.
argue
By the way,
against
was that your bill?
No, it wasn't my bill.
Okay.
But I would argue against that because most of the, we could take those protocols and start doing them right away. Most of them were pretty good consumer protocols.
Okay.
So in as much as it makes it more difficult, there's a good reason for it. But that doesn't mean we should wait for it either. We can sell debt tomorrow, and even though it doesn't have the force of law, we could in a contractually make those.
Just putting the outlets or the mechanisms in place is going to take us several months just to even get to that place.
Okay.
Some of the recommendations, just as a preview to my report, is going to make recommendations to propose a new ordinance change to amend some of the administrative codes. So that would be the first step. And then second step is establishing a pool of debt buyers that can be ready and available so that when we are ready to sell, we can sell it to them quickly. So that process may take several months just to put into place. So in terms of being ready by January 2014, I highly, it's less likely that we would be ready for that time, but we can definitely have the discussions in terms of getting ready for that January 14th. So I don't see us having the need to accelerate the debt sale at this point.
Okay. Very good. Anything else, Mr. Boone?
Yeah, just a couple. You'd mentioned the Port of Long Beach, and you said that there was something that was worked out. I know that they were previously identified as owing like $87,000. So what was actually worked out on that? Is it?
Well, it's not. It's being worked on by engineering directly with the people that they've worked on in these projects to try to collect on that money. So engineering's taking the lead on that.
Okay, that hasn't been actually
No.
worked out yet.
It's not been worked out.
So the Port of Long Beach, from what I'm understanding, is that they are willing and able to pay for the debt or the invoice. They just need supporting documentations that need to go behind that invoice before they make that payment. These two payments were for a construction project that was completed over 10, 15 years ago. So the Bureau of Engineering is going through, the Harbor Division down at the Bureau of Engineering is going through its records to compile all the supporting documentation to resubmit to the Port of Long Beach. So at that point, Port of Long Beach would consider making the payment, but just saying that you owe us and just presenting the invoice is not sufficient for them at this point.
Another question generally about sort of some of the debt that's out there. There was some debt for applications for street vacations, and there was some debt for B permits. And so I was wondering, with this type of debt, the city took the action without receiving the payment for the permit. Is that right? Or was there additional money that?
Usually what happens with permits with the Department of Public Works and several of their bureaus is they make an estimate of what it would cost to do the work, and that would be the basis of the permit amount. And if it exceeds that amount, they would then send an adjusted invoice to the person that requested the work for the additional payment. Theoretically, you stop work until you get your payment, but of course the city tries to work with different development companies, and they'll continue to do the work and then hope that the payment comes in. But for the most part, they're supposed to pay on permit work up front.
So the difference is not that that's where I was just
Right.
curious about it. It's not that we're doing the work prior to the being paid permit. It's that it's a sort of variable price, and
Right.
there's adjustments. And so all of those debts have to do with estimate changes rather than not doing the work.
Correct. In fact, some of the invoices that were captured, or at least I requested to scrub the list, we were able to identify that there was a deposit on file, so we needed to true up that invoice. So, for example, if there was $2,000 on file for deposit and the invoice was for $2,500, so we were able to take that $2,000 and offset the invoice, and now the new debt owed is only $500. So in those cases where we did have a deposit on file, we were able to true it up and reflect a more accurate reflection of that invoice.
And this wasn't so widespread that you would recommend a change in policy in terms of how we issue permits. It was not a trend like that's what.
No, and the way permits are issued, for example, if engineering needs to review the design work, they would collect money for that upfront. So there's an account for design. When it gets to construction, they'll collect money for that aspect of it. So when Fernando was mentioning that we were able to find another account with money, the design might have run short, but the construction money is still there in terms of the review work. So they just say, we'll take it from the construction. Now you owe us on the construction. The Children's Hospital, as of at least a few months ago, to my knowledge, was still in progress. It's not finished yet.
It's not a systemic department-wide issue with the Department of Public Works in terms of permits, how the permitting process works. So in terms of collecting the deposit, about 97% of all of the permits are collected up front. So it's not a systemic issue, but there are some instances that I've identified where we have about $20,000, $30,000 of work that may have been performed without a deposit on file. So those are the areas that I'm working with the department. But when you look at the overall permits that we're bringing in for the entire city, $20,000 is relatively low. So I don't see it as a systemic problem that's plaguing the department.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions about the LA DOT debt for the parking tickets. $21 million seems like a huge amount of money. That's $21 million for a 9-month period. Do we know how much of the parking ticket fines that were levied during that period of time this represents?
I'm going to ask DOT to come to the table on that one, since that's not the item on the agenda for the Board of Review item.
Good afternoon, Wayne Garcia, Department of Transportation. Last fiscal year, for example, we collected $156 million for parking citation debt. This next fiscal year, our goal is also $156 million. At the time this was written in 2010, this debt here was, I believe our revenue goal at that time was $133 million net. So we take in 70% of the gross, which equals about, for 2010, about $133 million.
So that's still a significant amount we're not collecting. Is this typical? Is this a typical 9-month period of uncollected debt?
Yeah. What happens with parking citation debt is about 60 to 70% of the issues here are DMV related, meaning the DMV cannot provide a name and address for the registered owner, or somebody receives a parking citation and the previous owner says that the previous owner was getting the notices. For example, a citation was issued to me. I sold the car to you. You didn't follow through and submit your paperwork to the DMV, so I'm getting the notices. I have a release of liability that says I didn't own the car, and now I can't find you because you did not submit your new name and address to the Department of Motor Vehicles. So those are just out there in limbo somewhere. Another problem we have is with rental vehicles, because the majority of those are from out of state, so it's hard to, we could send them notices, but they often don't respond to the notices, just a reluctance to pay.
So if those are the primary causes for being unable to collect parking ticket debt, DMV or out-of-state vehicles, it would probably be a fair assumption then, if we surveyed some of the surrounding cities, whether it's Santa Monica or Burbank, that their ratio of uncollected parking debt would be relatively similar.
Yes, it would be relatively similar for the amount of vehicles that they try to collect from, because our contractor, which is Xerox, they also are the contractor for Santa Monica, for West Hollywood, for, Santa Monica, West Hollywood. I forgot the other local cities, but it's roughly the same.
And so how does our percentage of uncollected parking ticket debt compare with those other cities?
Well, we have actually one of the highest in the nation 2-year collection payment rates for parking citations. The City of Los Angeles Department of Transportation is 84% right now after 2 years. And the next highest is San Francisco at 85 and Boston at 85 as well. So we are the second highest in the nation in terms of second-year collections.
Who's first?
Yeah, that would be San Francisco and Boston are both tied at 85%.
Oh, right, better than us. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm from Massachusetts, so that's a little bit more tolerable. One more question on this. I've been known to get a few parking tickets in my time, I pay my LA ones promptly. Santa Monica, I may take a little longer on.
Attaboy.
Last time I went to renew, I don't remember if it was my license or if it was my registration. I couldn't because I had that unpaid ticket. If I'm correct and it was the license, that's every 3 or 5 years or whatever, and there would still be some tickets within this window of 2010 that could still wind up getting paid when they go to renew?
Yes, that's correct. If we can find the registered owner's name and address, then we can put a DMV registration hold on the person's vehicle, and that hold will stay for 2 years. However, if you just disregard that and do not renew your vehicle for 2 years, then the registration hold comes off the vehicle. Now we're starting over again.
So currently, we're intercepting registration for the vehicle, but we're not placing a hold on the driver's license or an identification renewal.
So if one of these guys whose debt we're waiving and forgiving goes to renew their license in 3 months, are they going to not have to pay it?
No, they will not have to pay it because in DMV, the driver's license information is not linked to the registration information.
Okay, all right. And if somebody goes to renew their vehicle and they get dinged for an old one, will they get dinged if we waive this, or will they not?
They will get dinged, yes, if there's a registration hold on your registration, and you go to register your vehicle, and you still have outstanding parking citations, they'll make you pay those first before they issue you your registration.
And if we've waived it, do we lose that money? Or do we still get it?
No, we would lose that money if we wrote it off?
Yeah.
Okay. If we wrote it off, none of these would be still on DMV hold. None of these here would still be on DMV hold. These are what we call Dmv Hold Rejects, which is we tried to put a DMV hold. The DMV rejected it because they couldn't come up with a name and address. The make on the citation did not match the make at the DMV database, or the 2-year cycle has elapsed and the hold fell off.
Well, I imagine being a DMV reject is punishment enough then. Thank you.
And council member,
It would be a badge of honor. Just for sake of clarity, members, what's before us today is limited to the Board of Public Works large write-offs of over $5,000 each. So it's the 43 specific invoices that are contained in the report. At the Board of Review meeting, they considered a variety of other matters, but many of them were invoices of less than $5,000, which don't come before the council for approval. So that's why there's other categories that are in the report but aren't part of the agenda today. Mr. Campos, did you want to add something?
I was just going to offer, if you would like, I would be more than happy to stop by your office along with the Department of Transportation to provide an update. It's an item that has been discussed. I presented an item about 6 months ago that talked into depth in terms of parking citations, what bucket of money, our percentage, the 18% or 16% that goes uncollected, why does it go uncollected, some of the policy advice that I provided to this governing body in terms of what we can do. I have been working with the Department of Transportation to move those forward. In fact, we are seeking assistance through the state capitol to possibly change state codes or California vehicle codes that would allow us to pursue some of those options. But I'd be more than happy to share that information again with you, and it's been public record already.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If there's nothing further, members, it's the recommendation to adopt the Board of Review report to remove 43 invoices from the Board of Public Works Office of Accounting, totaling $627,000. And if there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is a motion, Weezar O'Farrell, relative to reappropriating $9,610 in reverted funds to the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Gracie Liu, a general manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but in short, it's, as the motion states, it is for a refund that the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council received last fiscal year, and this money, because it is now considered swept, needs to be reallocated from the reserve fund back to our 44B account in order for us to transfer those funds back to the neighborhood council.
So, members, over the last 3 or 4 years, the council has struggled to identify what constitutes encumbered funds for neighborhood councils, and what hasn't been encumbered has been swept in partial effort to address our budget challenges. If on the theory that if the money isn't being used by the neighborhood councils, then it should be restored to the general fund. I gather, what is somewhat unique about this case, and every one of the neighborhood councils can make an argument as to some item that the city determined to be unencumbered that should be refunded. What's unique about this is that the money actually came back to the neighborhood councils so late in their budgetary year that they couldn't have encumbered it even if they had tried to, I gather. Is that right?
Well, a few issues. The first issue is that the monies that were originally spent on this project were from budget fiscal year 10-11. So it did not get returned back to them until this last budget year, 2012-2013. So it just, in the past, what has happened is that when we get funds that were from a different fiscal year, then it's considered just gone, even though it was returned back to you. The issue of it, why we have been very specific in asking for it to come from the reserve fund, was in the past what has happened is when funds like this have been moved, it's come out of the current existing year funds, which then shorts the existing year, which is, as Councilmember Krikorian, has resulted in, significant shortfalls within the fund, like $1 million this past year that we were able to actually fix, luckily. But it's issues like this that actually contribute to that problem of what is just an appropriation versus what is cash, backed by cash, which is why it's very specific. It has to come out of the reserve fund.
Okay, so the department is supportive of this situation with this particular neighborhood council?
We understand that this vendor was paid and they didn't ultimately do the work because the project was canceled, and they did return the funds. We're supportive of neighborhood councils being able to spend funds. I think it's more of a policy issue as to City Council whether they want those funds to be spent on that current fiscal year, even if it gets returned back several years after.
Mr. Blumen.
Are we setting a precedent by doing it this way? Is this a new, you're saying it's a policy question, so are we making a statement in doing this that we'll have to?
Right. Well, there will be other neighborhood councils that will likely come forward and state that, well, we want access to funds that we weren't able to spend. Again, as you noted, Councilmember Krikorian, that this is special because they did have it set aside to spend on something, but neighborhood councils may come forward and also ask for such requests in the future of, taking monies out of the reserve fund and putting it back into their current year accounts.
And is there a big backlog of this kind of?
No, this one is very specific.
Potential out there of this type of situation, funds.
Well, this current fiscal year, there is approximately about $500,000 of unused funds that was swept back into the general fund from last fiscal year. So you could potentially have neighborhood councils coming forward to ask for those funds. So I think it's up to City Council as to what parameters they would like to put on those types of requests. If it's something like this, which is pretty specific and unlikely to be repeated because it was a return onto their purchase card, then it's that might be something that differentiates from just funds that were never used.
Council members, it's not uncommon for the neighborhood councils to make a request for reappropriations. The difference here, though, is as was stated by the general manager, that in prior years, where that money would come from would be from the Neighborhood Empowerment Trust Fund, which is there to provide funding for the current fiscal year. So, in essence, by getting refunding, so to speak, neighborhood councils, they were depleting their current year funds and creating deficits. So this would be a new policy direction that the council would be taking in terms of using the reserve fund to to, in essence, refund the neighborhood councils. There's instances where departments make similar requests, and that's taken up by the council and made on a case-by-case basis, but there is the potential that other neighborhood councils could come forward and start making the similar request. And individually, the dollar amounts aren't big, but taken together, it could be something that the council should consider as we go along with the budget.
Yeah, and for me, the issue is really, in the big scheme of things, even if all of these requests were taken together, it's not an enormous amount of money, but it is a matter of fairness, too, of treating the challenge that the department constantly has and that we have when we deal with these situations is adopting policies which are equitably applied across all 95 neighborhood councils with each of their own unique specific needs. I mean, I can see an argument made that this is a unique circumstances because it's a 2-year budget span, because it was in fact encumbered money. It was more than encumbered, it was spent money that was then refunded. That's different than a situation where they say, well, we had discussed in our minutes 8 months ago that we were going to spend this, and so therefore it's encumbered. I think this is a pretty unique circumstance, but yes, each of us will get requests from other neighborhood councils that say, well, we have a similar situation, and I mean, to date, I think we've had to kind of deal with that on an ad hoc basis, but we do need to be mindful of the importance of being equitable among all of them. Mr. Kretz, Mr. Bonin, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on this? I'm fine with going ahead and suggesting that we recommend approval of this matter to council, given the unique circumstances. If there's no,
yeah, I would just add that we declare it sort of a unique circumstance and not use this as a precedential model, and that we look at that policy maybe a little bit. It may make sense, but I'd like to look at the general policy a little more carefully. But I'm okay with going ahead with the specific action.
is there anything currently? I've kind of stepped out of it a little bit now. Is there anything going on in education and neighborhoods in terms of looking at specific recommendations for dealing with encumbrances? No.
I believe that Councilmember Parks does see an issue with neighbor councils doing this type of doing these types of requests with their council members. So I think that he is wanting to explore, the parameters of what would be acceptable versus not. It's not currently on the agenda, though, but I know he's discussed, he's expressed interest in doing so.
Okay. So without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, council members.
Item number 2 that is set for closed session, we are going to be continuing, and I think that completes our open. Yeah. Okay. All right. So is there anyone who would like to offer comment on closed session item 1 or the closed session item for the special session, item number 1? And so seeing none, public comment for both the closed session and the special closed session is closed, and we will now retire to closed session. So. No other matters before the committee. We are adjourned.